So, Megan, which we're talking about, is from 2022, just happened, and it is about a robotics engineer at a toy company builds a lifelike doll that begins to take on a life of its own, and it's directed by Gerard Johnstone. Um, yeah, and it's a surprisingly heartfelt film about grief, loss, and AI. Like you said,
Mhm.
it was absolutely unexpected. I was just like, "Oh, this is silly," and some people like hate on it because it is super goofy.
Mhm.
But I think, like, horror fans really get a kick out of that. Like, when we get a
Yeah.
truly goofy film, but it's also like, "Oh, okay.
I see
I
what you
see
did
you."
there. Yeah.
Yeah, I loved it, so I get it, and most people I know loved it. So, um, the film is that, young Katie's parents are dead. That's what we open with. She said. And after losing them in a car accident, Katie finds herself in the care of her distant, tech savvy aunt, Gemma.
Mhm.
And it's a rush moment of taking Katie in while trying to keep her life moving as usual. Because, as Kat mentioned, this is a person who is not ready or equipped to care for a child.
Yeah.
Um, because Gemma is cold, standoffish. She's a workaholic who was not ready to take care of this kid and quite possibly had no intention of ever having kids of her own. That's a
Yeah.
thing, right? Especially
Yeah.
with millennial parents or millennials who could be of parenting age, right? That's a big thing. Is like instead they do want the dog.
Yeah.
So we want the dog instead. Totally valid. And so this is something that's like sprung upon her, and she feels like it's the right thing to do instead of asking, like, am I the right person to do this?
Yeah,
Um,
it feels like obligatory instead of like I should do this. This would be the right thing to do when it's like there were other options, my
and
guy.
is it the right thing to do? And it's also like that
Yeah.
question of like, family is super important for sure, but it's not always like the end all be all. And I think
Mhm.
you really have to question that. But Gemma's capable of doing a lot, and she's very intelligent, and so I think she was like, "This is gonna be fine. I'm fine. So
Yeah.
this is gonna be fine. Whatever. It's a
I
kid."
got it.
Yeah, like I
Kids, robots, same thing. So,
yeah, like I design things really. I create life all the time.
toys. Yeah.
So
So I get
okay,
kids
so
because toys. You see the
exactly.
connection. She
And
tried.
yeah, and hopefully at the end of this movie she's trying, but
Yeah.
she's talented and she's terribly obsessed with technology and the toys that she designs. But other than the technical aspects of the toys, she isn't particularly interested in the application of the items, because she doesn't
Mhm.
make toys because of the joy that it brings kids. It is more just a challenge, or she likes like the technical aspects of it. There's this whole conversation where they're talking with a therapist, and she has these toys that are on display. They're collector's items, so they're not to be
Mhm.
played with. And Katie, wants to play with this toy, and she kind of has this like rough reaction to her unboxing this very precious item that is just sitting on her shelf and not being used for what it was actually supposed to be used for. But then she's like,
Yeah.
oh, there's all these things that it was capable of doing, and you're not giving it the respect that it deserves. But it's like, that's a kid, and this is a toy.
Yeah.
So it reminded me of like my uncle had a lot of collectors, like Star Trek and Star Wars and other kinds of
Yeah.
toys, and I wasn't allowed to touch them. And he had this like pretty Queen Amidala doll in there,
Okay.
and I was like, "She's really
For
pretty."
for play? For
But
play,
it's
though?
like, "These are not toys." I was like, "That's a toy." Like on the back of the box, there's a kid playing with the toy, so I think
Yeah.
it is a toy, and I'm gonna be allowed, but then not.
Yeah. Well, it's
Then
like
later,
every adult, like 30-year-old is just like, "Oh, I can buy all the things that my parents said I couldn't have," and but then they're, like, adults, so they just don't
mhm,
have the same play element to it.
yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, it was like,
It's fun.
Mike's, nibblings came over, and I had to, like, distinguish, like, these are toys that you can touch, and these are toys you can't touch. And it
Yeah.
was so hectic for me, but that's, like that is really the thing, is, like, you have to like, that's something I didn't even consider until they were here, and I was like, of course they're gonna want to like touch these things. They're toy adjacent, or they are toys,
Yeah.
but that's not what we use them for. And that's like how Gemma works. Like she just never considered and never had cause to consider what it means to take it in a child. And so when she decides to test out her newest creation, which is an AI life-size version of an American Girl doll, on her grieving niece, it's not because she thinks Cady needs a friend at this difficult time, but because she needs a practical test for the device. Part of
Yep.
it is like, yeah, she needs a friend, but it's not like I'm doing this because I want you to feel better.
Yeah.
I want you to do this so I don't have to do anything.
Yep.
Which is not the
Sure
answer.
was.
So, yeah, it's very clearly like, "Oh, I got 2 birds with 1 stone." Like,
Yeah.
both
How
I get to,
convenient.
yeah, to
The
test out this
situation has
toy
become. Yeah.
and also not have to deal with a sad kid.
Yeah.
Like
Best of both worlds. So
yeah.
ridiculous.
So I do think a part of it is that she feels ill-equipped to handle the emotions and grief Katie is feeling because she herself does not grieve. Like we don't
Yeah.
ever see her cry. But there is scenes like as soon as Katie comes in, um, she just like puts her in this room that's still full of her stuff, like still full of
Yeah.
Gemma's stuff. Like it she never like it takes a long time before they kind of get into any kind of groove, and even then it's like a problem. But it's just very clear that she's just gonna smush Katie into her already existing life instead of adapting what her life is to fit Katie. And so the way to do that is to placate this child and make it somebody else's responsibility. She could have did
Yep.
that with like a human, but instead she chose M3GAN. So
Yeah.
M3GAN, Model 3 generative android, is what her name is. Though my partner mentioned that it's for fem bot, those are gynoids, not androids. So
Huh.
her name is wrong. It should be Model 3 generative gynoid. So her name should just be like Meg.
Meg.
Meg. But they are an AI companion that learns and adapts according to who she imprints on. And this imprinting happens when Katie places her fingers on the wrist of M3GAN, and from then on, Katie is her master, which is a problem. Children should
Yeah.
not be the master of such powerful technology that we haven't tested on
Yep.
anybody or
With
anything.
like no fail safes. It's like handing a kid an iPad with no parental controls. Like, what are you
Yeah.
doing, my
Yes.
friend?
Well, it's also thinking of like when, they tried to launch that like AI bot on Twitter, and then in like an hour it was racist and anti-Semitic. It's like imagine
Yeah.
if you gave kids the internet when they're trying to learn how the world works, and they have all these random people just telling you like this is how it is. And then you're
Yeah.
not around to tell them no, that's not what we do.
Yeah.
Because like hatred is a learned thing, so they
Yeah. You can learn a lot on the internet, including bad things.
exactly. And if that's the only thing, without safety, it could be really tough. Like pretty
Yeah.
much anything, you just need to have some precautions. And it could be really amazing tool. Like you can learn
Yeah.
and you can grow, and it can be an amazing also like grief tool as well. Like it could do that if it's not
Yeah.
the only thing doing that.
Yep.
And it's also made for that.
Yeah. Yeah. You're hitting the nail on the head there, Gabe. You got it. You're correct.
um
I'm gonna say similar things. Not like
Woo, look at
exactly, but
us.
like you reinforce some things that I'm gonna say later, and I
We're
appreciate
on the
that about
same
you.
wavelength. That's so
Yep.
cool. Listeners, we write our scripts separately and we try not to read each other's stuff,
To not spoil the
so that we
fun.
can, yeah, because then we learn and we can react to each other. But
Mhm.
sometimes it's just fun when we're on like the same.
Yeah.
Something that I
Symbiotic.
was grateful for that my friend Jeff mentioned was that there isn't a mention of Asimov's 3 laws for androids, which you hear every time. Those laws always come into play, which is a robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. 2 is a robot must obey orders given by human beings, except where such orders were conflict with the first law. And 3, a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first and second law. So it's at the heart, it's like you can't hurt humans. You have to listen to what they say, and you have to make sure you're safe. But if what someone
Not
says is
yeah.
hurting someone, you can't do that. And if protecting yourself is hurting someone, you can't do that. I mean, it's an integral part of any Android media.
Mhm.
When we're talking about AI, like this understanding of like we're going to implement these laws to ensure the safety of humanity because we're kind of giving them a lot of power and they at some point are going to surpass us, and so we need something to assure that we're going to be okay. And so that was a part of, Isaac Asimov, who's written amazing science fiction literature and done those laws as a way to keep them in check. However, almost all uh, AI gone wrong films
Mhm.
feature these three laws will eventually get to the point where an AI learns that the best way to protect humans is to remove them from the equation since they are their own biggest threat. Right?
Facts.
I watch iRobot a lot.
Yeah.
And that really is like the one of the biggest things for them is becomes conflicting when it's like, okay, I have to preserve myself, I have to preserve people, and I have to do what they say, which is to preserve them, but they're hurting themselves. So
Yep.
and in this case she didn't have those three laws. Like it literally, like they're just like, she wouldn't hurt people, like
There were literally no fail safes. They were just like, we made this robot and we're not even going to test it. We're literally going to give it to a human child with no precautions whatsoever.
yeah, like Gemma's like, we can like override it from the computer, and I feel like
Yeah.
her, like the people she's working with are like, well, what happens if you can't override? And she did like the thing in like the documentaries where they're like stumped and they like look away and they don't answer the question and it just keeps going. Where she's
Yeah,
it's
we're
like,
like,
what if she becomes sentient and can override your overrides? And she's like,
we don't
hmm.
talk about that. Like, we don't talk about our grief,
That's not
it's the
going to
same thing.
happen.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm too good for this, and I'm on a deadline. And we need a lot of money. So yeah, they don't explicitly talk about it, but it is kind of like at one point one of her coworkers is like, she can't harm a human, but they're like, what do you mean? They're like, nothing says she can't hurt a human, and her killing is so fun. It is really
Yeah.
silly. Instead of the like humanity is humanity's worst threat, M3GAN
Mhm.
learns a twisted way to protect Cady specifically and becomes her sole companion and a coping mechanism that ultimately stunts her emotional growth and healing.
You're
So she's physically hurting people, but she's also damaging Cady in very specific ways and forcing her to close herself off and no longer want to interact with humans, because why would you when you have someone who gets you? So
yeah.
I did love like there's a part there's like a montage of M3GAN essentially mothering Cady and going through all these things, and she has to tell her to flush the toilet a bunch, which is also a thing as someone who's not a mom. I didn't think about the fact that you'd have to like tell a child to do
You
that
do,
a
yeah,
bunch.
that's a thing.
So I was like, you just think like, but at one point there is a little like aggravation in M3GAN's voice. Like M3GAN is the most human like android I've seen, where I guess besides Ex Machina, but where she's like, you have to just flush the toilet, Cady.
Yep.
And I was
It's
like,
like when you
ooh,
miss it's like when you miss a turn too many times and you think your GPS is getting sassy,
yeah,
you know?
rerouting.
You're like, "Wow, okay, I hear you, I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna turn, I promise."
Actually, a funny story about a map making weird personal choices.
Yeah.
Someone just told me that they were driving and the map was like, okay, turn right, and it was like, oh wait, no, I'm sorry. And then it and I was like, actually, turn left or something. And she's like, what? Did I just hear that? Like it stopped and was like, oh, I'm sorry. Like it told
Oh
her the
my
wrong
goodness.
directions and then stopped. And she's like, is that new? What is this? Am I in the Twilight Zone? That's scary. If my
That's
AI did that,
crazy.
I'd be
Or
scared.
it's not AI and it's just a person voice acting your directions to you. That would be also
Wild.
very funny. But
Yeah.
also if it is AI, that is really crazy because it's like, "My apologies."
They might be like putting it in to make them more like relatable and like human, but then it's
It's
scary. You don't want
creepy.
them to be that
You don't want them to be
relatable.
your friends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a new AI for Spotify called DJ. It's called, if you look up DJ, he comes up and he says your name. So he's like, "Oh, hey Gabe." And I was like,
Oh
I
god.
was like, "Oh no." And then he's just like, "I'm going to do all these mixes for you." And he's like I've been listening. Here's some music that you were listening to a few months ago, and I'm like, I get it. You're really wonderful, but I'm like, you're a little too cool, man. And don't say my name like that. It's scary.
Oh my
It's
goodness, I've never
scary.
seen this. Okay, I have to
You
look it
got to
up.
use it on your app on your phone.
Okay, I will.
Well, maybe we could have it at the end of this episode. Stay
Yeah.
tuned. We'll have a clip of Kat turning it on, and so we could hear them for the first time. I digress. Uh, the reboot of Child's Play in 2019 featured a similar AI companion for a child, and this new Chucky sported a malfunctioning chip that resulted in him misinterpreting actions by the children. There's all kinds of antics where he they had a love of horror movies, and so he was like, "Horror, that's cool. Violence
Yeah,
is fun." So he
yeah,
just like didn't understand things. But he also has a whole thing where he then, because he's AI and we have so many pieces of technology that connect to each other, it's like I have my watch that connects to my phone that connects to my computers. And so, like, if I leave my computer behind, my watch is like, you left your computer behind, it's gone. Um, but people have like the thing where you tell your Siri to put on the lights or whatever, your
yeah,
Amazon
smart
Echo.
homes. Yeah.
Yeah, smart house. We should definitely do that one day. That
Yep,
scared
it's a
me.
fun classic.
um, but at some point, Chucky does connect to like different devices. Like Disney, he's connected to like a self-driving car and like other
Yeah.
AI. M3GAN does the same thing. She has a point where she does connect to other technology, which again, it just really digs into like what are the twisted ways that technology is can be manipulated if put into the wrong hands, especially if those hands
Mhm.
are not existence because it's technical
Yeah.
in the airwaves.
Who knows tech
It's
better than tech, you know?
confusing to all Congress people who don't understand what Wi-Fi is and what TikTok
Did
does. Um,
How does TikTok get from my phone to the Wi-Fi, Gabe?
is TikTok charging me my Wi-Fi? And why does my
Yeah.
TikTok have questionable things on it? They're like telling on each other. Anyway,
Yeah, it's really
um,
goofy.
again, I digress. M3GAN also comes from a place of twisted care for Cady, and after being placed in the position of sole emotional support, it further twists that interpretation into something violent. Because that's kind of what happens with Protector AI.
Mhm.
We kind of see, again, you see that in iRobot where they are calculating who to save and stuff, and
Mhm.
but with Chucky and M3GAN, it's like, okay, these kids are in trouble and they are my sole like responsibility. And so I don't understand what's wrong with killing those are bad. And that was like challenging the life of this thing I'm taking care of.
Yeah.
Oh, we also did Mother. I forgot that. I
We
don't
did do
remember what
Mother.
we said in that episode.
Me neither,
So
but it happened, so
there are other sci-fi horror references that could be made um, in M3GAN, including Ghost in the Shell. There's
yeah.
a scene where, oh, a few scenes actually that show M3GAN stripped down to like her bare robotic parts, and she's like strung up for updates and recalibrations, and just like they're running diagnostics or whatever. But she's just robot,
Yeah.
and it's giving Major or whatever her name is looks Ghost and Shelley. Then there's also kind of an homage to Terminator 2, where instead of the stress, like inhuman running of T1000, there's the dancing pursuit.
Mhm.
And then also like her running on all fours, craziness.
Yep.
And there could even be connections made between M3GAN and her, the AI companion that steals Joaquin Phoenix's heart, and where Scarlett Johansson's her allowed a sad, lonely man to feel love, M3GAN works to comfort Cady. So it's kind of cool because there are these little hints that we can see how AI media has influenced her in the past.
Yeah.
And though there are interesting and fun horror scenes that like including her chasing the boy on all fours, it was crazy. That was or her
Yeah. It gave me, like,
going
the
at
robot dog. Yeah.
yeah, and going after the dog
Yeah.
that hurt her, and all the other, and she's like when she's just like, no, you can't do that, like Gemma,
Yeah.
and it's giving like Hal 9,000 or whatever. Um,
Yeah.
Like when she's just like, no. She's super sassy, and I really love that. Like, you don't get sassy. I don't know. I think she's fun.
Yeah.
I also really loved her Twitter war with Chucky on the internet. That was fun. But there's comedy in it as well, and I'm sure everyone has seen Megan's notorious dancing chase scene. But surprisingly, there is a lot of heart and discussion to be had in Megan. In Katie's attempts to cope, she connects with Megan and relies on her in an unhealthy way that leaves her unable to interact with others properly. And the constant mothering Megan does for Katie is a conversation on children and their near constant screen time. There's an entire montage sequence of like the commercials for what Megan is going to be, and it's literally like, don't want to parent. Are you a parent but you don't want to? Here's a cool companion that will do all of that for you. You could forget your kid exists. You could be literally at the same table and never have to hear a thing they say. Because aren't they annoying? Aren't they so pesky? And it's just them at the table, and Katie will ask for something, and Megan will be the one who complies. And Gemma just gets to continue her life of being a single woman who works on technology. And it's just like you also see like before that in like the where toys that they had in the beginning that kind of look like Furbies.
Uh-huh.
That there's like all those commercials, and it's very like playing on like kids' obsessions with toys and technology and how parents will relent. There's even a conversation about the screen time, and that's why they get into the accident in the beginning. Is like, what is she doing? Like, is she's watching the screen now? She wants this new toy or something, and
Mhm.
they give you just give it to them to shut them up, right? And that's it really felt real. Like again, I don't have kids, but I interact with them and I know there's like it's surreal the interaction with technology from like me growing up like as a millennial. Like we grew into a technological world. So we were right on the end of when it like was starting to creep in, but for them to have it as like babies. like
Mhm.
like we live in a world where children are interacting with technology at younger and younger ages. I sound like a
Yeah.
grumpy old person. I'm not. I think it's really cool.
Yeah.
Genuinely. And because it could be an amazing tool. It could encourage learning and growth. It could stimulate, it could make you feel things. We've talked about technology so many times in the show. It really can do awesome stuff
Yeah.
if it's used correctly. But
Yeah.
Gemma, in her inability to properly care for Katie and her feelings, has instead essentially left her alone in front of the TV to raise herself. Right?
Yeah.
It's just like you put her over there, you put on her shows, you leave, and you're like, she'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And then you're like wondering why she has like commitment issues or can't
Mhm.
understand people's emotions
It
or
does not like
her
talk about her
own.
feelings. Yeah.
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 Like, oh, I'm sure. And though the therapist in the film isn't much better than Gemma, um, because she doesn't quite protect or advocate for Katie, like she does in a loose way, but it didn't feel like she wasn't really doing it. And it kind of just felt like she just wanted to be an issue without also understanding how ill-equipped Gemma is and coming from it from that point of view. Like she just tried to make Gemma seem like she's a villain. Um, and that's just gonna make her closed off and standoffish even more instead of like, okay, how can we build this together?
Yeah.
But we do have to wonder about the effect of Megan's parenting and what that has on Katie's growing mind. If she didn't even like, even if she didn't turn evil, like there would
Mhm.
have been problems with this tactic of just like hand my kid over to the computer person to raise
Mhm.
and I'm sure she'll be fine. But ultimately, Megan is a hilariously gory horror film with a lot to say about the future of kids and tech, about loss and grief, and what it means to be a family.
Yeah.
Because it's super complex, super messy, but ultimately very fun.
Yeah. No, it's like a very good time. It definitely it's doing a lot with like what would reasonably seem just like a silly fun time. And there's just so you touched on a lot of it, but a lot of just like Gemma isn't necessarily like a villain. She just needed to recognize where she was failing, and, like, instead of doing what she thought was good for her, did what was right for Cady, and that's, like, what's frustrating about the movie. Like,
Mhm.
that's the only thing where
Yeah.
I'm like, but, like, they did it on purpose because it's a commentary. Like, it's not like a critique to the film. It's more like, oh wow, they did a really good job showcasing. They're like, one, yeah. So it's like it is really hard to be a parent in capitalism because there's like literally no time to actually do the
Mhm.
parenting. And like you're never really given time for yourself either. So it's like you don't have the time to do the things you need to do in terms of healing or getting therapy or like doing or feeling like happy in life because
Yeah.
there's just no extra time. The only time you have is work, and then the second you're not working, it is reasonably hard to have to like manage an entire human being that has tons of needs and
Mhm.
actively like
And relies on
loves
you.
you, yeah, relies on you, loves you, wants your
Yeah.
support, like is like you're their world, and
Mhm.
like that's really challenging to have to
Yeah.
navigate.
And
So
it's
like
super
I totally
unfair
get
for
how we
her.
get. Mhm.
Like, she
Yeah.
was not in any way, that was never her life that she planned, but that doesn't mean, like, you shouldn't be held responsible for not providing it. And I think in the end, she comes around to that. Like, she
Yeah.
hears what people are saying is like, "Oh, oh, okay."
Yeah, because it's like a whole thing. It's like if you don't want this, then just don't want it, and that's totally fine. But like if you do want it, then you got to step
You
up.
have
And
to
I feel
want
like
it.
towards the end, she does decide that she ultimately does want to be there for Katie and like wants to be a parent for Katie. But like it takes her a while to get there, and I mean that's reasonable. There's growing pains. It just is really unfortunate that those growing pains happen at such a pivotal and like traumatic point in
Mhm.
Katie's life.
Yeah.
That's where the main problem is. Like, it would make sense if like she was just like it took a minute for her to adjust to having to like alter her every day to
She just had
accommodate a
no
child.
intention to do that.
Yeah, and it's like reasonable that that would take a minute, you know.
Mhm.
But like because of the situation, it's just that is such like a damaging period because she's also like dealing with the grief of her parents, and
Yeah.
the loss of her parents. So
Yeah. We can't all
yeah,
be Lilo's sister, Nani. We can't all be her.
yeah,
You
yeah.
can't be best guardian, you know?